If you're trying to focus on catching the best in the world and they're there and you're down here, you're looking to close that gap. And if you just sort of copy of what they're doing, you potentially can do that, but they're not resting on their laurels. They're trying to get better all the time because that profile always goes of higher. You sometimes have to work 24 hours a day. Your business is on the line. It's not 9 to 5. It's not that process. And sports people are in that business. Is that if you want to be the best, you've got to do what you've got to do to get there. And if you question that, your own determination, perhaps you're not in the right area. I came from a middle-class family, but that was really down to my father's desire. Is that my grandfather on my father's side was a carpenter, moved into Marlow because Buckinghamshire, where I still live now, and that High Wycombe was the furniture capital of Great Britain. I don't think they produce much furniture there now, but it's still recognised as being the furniture capital. So he was involved in that. He actually made propeller props in the Second World War, and so his craft was very high standard. My grandfather on my mother's side, my mother was from Birmingham, and my grandfather drove trams and buses for 40 years in Birmingham. And so that sort of really sort of working class. I've got two older sisters. One's 9 years older than me and the other one's 5. So there's quite big gaps. And I suppose educational wise, we all went to the same comprehensive school in Marlow, quite small. Must have been my eldest sister's one of the first students at that school after it was built. And that we all followed in the footsteps. But educational wise, of ability wise, we probably slipped down the ladder of that process. I'm heavily dyslexic. I really struggled at academia at school, but always loved sports. In those days, when you're sort of thinking of the early 70s, is that with only sort of 2 or 3 TV channels, is that whatever sport was on was mainstream, that everyone could watch and be a part of it. So sport was always a big part of my upbringing. The first colour TV that we had is my dad, from radio rentals, and that's going back a little bit, rented a colour TV for the 1968 games. I was a bit too young at that point. I would have been 6. I don't really remember of that, but very vividly remember Munich, and especially Mark Spitz, American swimmer who won 7 gold medals at 1 Games. I was a 10-year-old at that point, and each one of his gold medals was won in a world record time. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be fantastic to be able to go to Olympics and maybe having the opportunity of standing on a podium and winning a medal at some point. As a 10-year-old, I hadn't found my sport, or I should say the sport found me. And so it's sort of humble beginnings in some ways, but my father's work ethic, he wanted to get away from home as soon as he could. He went into the Merchant Navy, did that for a good few years. He came out that a lot older than most. He had to do national service, and then he sort of worked for the gas board and started setting up his own building business. So as a kid, I was brought up on of unloading brick lorries in the days that we used to do it by hand. None of these sort of cranes on the back of lorries now that there is. So there was always a game of how many bricks you could move in one go. My father could do 7, and I think the best at that time I could do as sort of 10, 12-year-old was 5. Because it's not just the physical strength of lifting the weight, which isn't that heavy. It's the pressure you've got to put on it. And so I think I had a physical upbringing from that point of view. So when I did find the sport of rowing, and that was when I went to Great Marlow School, the head of the English department had 2 loves within sport. One was rugby and the other was rowing. The school didn't offer either of those sports. We were a football and cricket school more than anything else. And as I said, I struggled academia wise, so any excuse to get out of classes. So the house cricket in the summer, even if I wasn't playing, I would try and be the scorer for the other team. So I'd have to miss lessons to get there. And so when I got the opportunity of going out on the river during school time, during games lessons, I just thought this was a wonderful thing to do. So that's how it started. Rowing is quite complicated with its movements and the balance of the boat and having the control. And I did struggle with that to start with. But what Francis was able to do is that he made it quite a lot of fun. He asked 12 people in my year group. Within 2 or 3 weeks, we'd got down to 4 people. And he always said that he used to pick the athletes that he used to ask to row by the size of their hands and feet. As students coming into the school of 12, 13-year-olds, if you had big hands and feet, you're likely to grow into a big, tall person. And rowing is a leverage sport, is that what it looks like and feels like is that you're pulling the oar through the water. Now, that isn't the case. That's what, as I say, that's what it feels like. But the fact is that when the blade goes in the water, that's the static part, and the boat is levered past that position. So the taller you are, the further you can reach, the further you're moving your boat per stroke. And so that's where rowing in the different categories, because there's a lightweight category as well, they all tend to be of long levers, and it's a leverage sport. It took me 10 years of my rowing career to work out that. Shows you my education in some ways, that simple physics took me a while to grasp. And it wasn't until I was talking to an Olympic swimmer, and they said, oh, what we do is that we reach out, we grab a bit of water, and we put ourselves past that. It's so logical, but that's really when it sort of keyed into me. So I sort of relied on my physical power to move boats, but it is actually more of the leverage. You need that power to get the boat up and running, but when it is up and running, it's about of how far you can move it per stroke that's the important aspect. And there's not that much difference from a heavyweight crew to a lightweight crew when the boats are up and running. The world records within 5 seconds of each other, over 2,000 meters. That's not a great deal. So that's where my sort of beginnings going. Journalists will talk about, oh, because you were dyslexic, you wanted to achieve in a different area. I don't know if that's the case or not. It's difficult to say. I think that possibly everybody likes doing something they're good at. And in that first season as a 14-year-old, we entered 7 events and we won all 7. And we thought we were the God's gift of rowing. The school boat club was attached to Great Marlow. Great Marlow was attached to Marlow Rowing Club, and we had a boat there where we used to row from. But there were 3 coaches that were coaching internationally, and we had 1 athlete who was lightweight world champion at that time. And so being around those people was great motivation. But from the ages of 16, 17, they were saying, oh, you're capable of being a world champion. You think, oh, that's nice. It sort of gives you a purpose and something to aim for. And then I took it from there and thinking, okay, world champion, why not Olympic champion? That's the ultimate in our sport. And so from the ages of 16 stroke 17, I had this goal that I'd probably go to 3 I wanted to go to 3 Olympics, Moscow for experience, LA for being in a final and maybe pushing for a medal, and then the gold medal that I was going to win was going to be Seoul in 88. Didn't quite turn out that way, but that's how it really all started. And I think from my point of view, the success that we had at junior level sort of helped me through my career and kept me in the sport, because everyone likes doing something that they're good at. What I didn't realize at the time is that of all the top schools, your Etons, your Radleys, your Shrewsburys, that are famous for doing the sport, is that the best athletes were in their 8, because that is the main rowing boat at school. And we didn't have 8 people to put together, so we couldn't compete against them. So those schools will sometimes have a first and second 8, and then maybe a 4 below that. So we were never racing the best athletes in our year group. That's probably one of the reasons we won a lot of races. But that's what bred into us, is that when it got to racing, and a couple of years later, when we're trying to get to the junior championships and being part of the national team, is that what we do, we row badly, we've got a lot of strength, we train very hard, but we win races. So when the going gets tough, we didn't give up. And so that sort of springboarded us to quite a lot of success in the early days. And so we were getting recognition from that more than anybody else was. So if you're struggling bottom of the class of maths and English, and you're moving down the different sets and struggling, and then taken out of doing French to go and do extra English, is that that doesn't give you a lot of confidence. So what rowing has given me, especially in those early days, is self-esteem, confidence, and the confidence of going out there and giving it your best shot of whatever your situation is. I think goals are really important, a process. It's a destination that you're going to. And so in those days is that there wasn't a very good structure within British rowing. It was called the Amateur Rowing Association at that time, and that probably sums it up very well. They were very amateurish in the way that they were doing it. To the Moscow Games in 1980 is that, and 84, we only had one full-time paid position, and that was the head coach. All the coaches were amateur, all the support staff, team doctors, physios were all volunteers and giving up their own time to help the team to get to the highest level. And so we're a very different era from that. And because we hadn't had success at the Olympics since 1948, the first games after the war, which were in London, and London took the games quite late on, and Great Britain only won 3 gold medals at that games, and 2 of them were rowing. And so that history, but those people weren't around and sort of telling of how they achieved it. Obviously, that was very different of a few years of coming out the Second World War. Most of them were soldiers, different parts of playing their part in the war. So it was a very different structure. We may have started the sport of rowing and made most of the rules and sort of laid the format, which we do with quite a lot of our sports. Then other countries come along and doing it better. East Germany were the dominant country when I was beginning my career as a junior and into the first half of my seniors. And they were very structured and disciplined how they did it. I was really left with myself and my coach to sort of work out how we got success. People saying that I've got this ability, which is great to have because that gives you, as I said, this direction of working in. But then you've got to try and work out how to get there. And that's the hard part because there's no pathway of showing how success is. Now, I'm not taking away from where our athletes are now and in Paris in a few weeks' time is that our British rowing team will probably be the strongest rowing team in the rowing world. It will be either us or the Netherlands, the 2 strong nations at the moment. But there is an excellent structure. There's a pathway. There is a process. It's almost a production line. It's scary to say in some ways, but there wasn't that in the 70s, 80s, or really getting into the early 90s. And so as an individual that sort of took it upon myself with the support of my family, of being able to sort of dedicate my time to training, preparing, but it was still difficult of getting those successes because you're battling against the whole structure of the way that we do the sport in this country, trying to find out of why some other countries are doing better than us and what we need to do to change. But that was a big advantage as well because I wanted to be a single sculler, even though I won all my medals in crew boats rowing with other people. But I had that sort of single desire that I was going to get through whatever and work a path out. And my coach, Mike Spracklin, who was my first international coach, recognised as being in the top 5 coaches in the world, even now, was great. But we had to find that pathway that hadn't been trodden for a very long time. I think that the work ethic that I sort of developed in some ways is that the old way of competing back in the 70s, because people didn't have very much time, was very intensive and very short duration. And what the East Germans were doing were the complete opposite. They were building up their stamina. It was low intensity for long periods of time. But of course, being an Eastern country from that era, closed borders, we only got rumours. We didn't really know what to do. So I copied what I thought they were doing. And actually what I did was took the intensity, what we were doing in the UK, and then doing the distance and the volume that they were doing. So if you're trying to focus on catching the best in the world and they're there and you're down here, you're looking to close that gap. And if you just sort of copy of what they're doing, you potentially can do that, but they're not resting on their laurels. They're trying to get better all the time because that profile always goes of higher. Each games that come round, you've got to be better than you were 4 years before. If you're at the same level, you may just get into a final, but you'll be struggling to do that. You probably wouldn't be a medalist. So you've got to have that improvement on a year-to-year basis. And the Olympics come around every 4 years. And what I found, because the East Germans were there, is that I copied what they were doing, but kept the intensity. And then suddenly I found myself above them. If I just copied exactly what they're doing, I probably would close that gap a little bit, but probably wouldn't have got ahead of them. And because I got ahead of them, started to get some good results in the single and the crews that I was rowing in, is success breeds success, is that the work ethic that I put in was paying off. So what do? You put even more work in, because that's what seemed to be the key element at that point. So that's where the sort of the work ethic came. So spinning it back to your question, is that it was really leading from the front. As an individual, where we are as a country isn't good enough. We've got to up the game. Follow me or stay by the wayside. And circumstances happened that a lot of politics in '84, but I ended up being in the fore quite late on. And with the drive and determination I had, and they sort of fell into that as well. They also wanted to prove a point that I may have been better at performing on all the tests that we have, but there are other factors within that, and it sort of all gelled together to give us success that we did have in '84. I suppose that I have to put you right on Jürgen. I'll do that in a little bit, but I'll start off with Mike Spracklin, who was my first Olympic coach, and he was a lightweight rower before there was lightweights. So he had to compete with the bigger, stronger people. And the way that he did it was, one, to be a better technician, two, to train harder, and being fitter, wouldn't have any excuses. So didn't use his lack of strength or height as a disadvantage, and always tried to spin that round. He was a great thinker within the sport and would come up with great ideas of how to move forward. And me and him together sort of forged the way of working, dragging and kicking British rowing to a higher level. He then became chief coach after coaching our four in '84. And at the Seoul Olympics, we got a gold, a bronze, and fourth places. And so the whole team was starting to perform, where 4 years before we had one gold medal, but everyone else was struggling at the back of the field, them being sort of developed a winning culture right the way through. And Jürgen came in from East Germany. His regimes were disciplined in some ways, but not what you would think as a German way of doing things. But he had a philosophy. One of the philosophies was with gold times. So every 4 years, for each category, boat category, he would come up with a gold time that we're working towards. And then each training session has to work from that. No athlete is forced to be part of the team. It's a lot of self-sacrifice that goes in that. But everyone wants to be a winner. And so the harder you work, the more chance that you've got of winning. I remember the story of Gary Player, who I've met a number of times, a lovely guy. And a journalist said to him, "You were very lucky in your career." And he said, "Yes, no, I was very lucky. I found the harder I worked, the luckier I became." And that really sort of sums it up. So I think because we'd gone through 2 or 3 generations of winning multiple medals and gold medals at the Olympics, is that there was a little bit of complacency within the team. Everybody in the team wanted to win, but do we have to work quite as hard to do it? That you sort of question yourself in that point. And I think that's one of the reasons that we didn't do so well at the last Olympics. Of Jürgen's now coaching out in France and helping them win Olympic gold medals. Mike Spracklin went to Canada. He went then back to the UK. He went to America and helped every country that he went into of winning medals. So their philosophy is a winning process. And wherever they do it, they get it. Of course, it's hard work and dedication. You look at a business of people setting up their business, is that you sometimes have to work 24 hours a day. Your business is on the line. It's not 9 to 5. It's not that process. And sports people are in that business, is that if you want to be the best, you've got to do what you've got to do to get there. And if you question that, your own determination, perhaps you're not in the right area. You've got to have that drive. And that's where the sort of business leaders that are involved in your entity very much of looking at what information they could find. I looked at business and how they were getting success when I wasn't, and how could I relate that to sport? And now I tend to relate sport back to business of how they can improve and focus on setting goals and the processes. I'll tell you one story that I find quite interesting now is that the World Championships were in France in Aiguebelette in '97. So it was the first year of the four working towards the 2000 Games. And we won the World Championships. And I had an interview from a French journalist from L'Equipe. And the article came out, and he had about 10 different categories that he marked out of 10 of technique, of endurance, of power, of stamina, of dedication, all these sort of categories. And that I was recognized as being the best in the world, or one of the best in the world at that point. And I didn't have a 10 in any of those categories. And I thought that was really cheeky. How can you have the sort of best athletes that's not getting any 10s at all? And it was a few weeks later that I was sort of mulling over his article, and he was probably right, is that there is probably somebody better than me in each one of those categories. So I shouldn't be getting a 10. But where I succeeded is that if you add all those scores up, the end score was higher than anybody else. So somebody might have had a 10 in one area, but maybe a 4 or a 5 or a 6 in another, where I was 9s, 8s and 7s across the board. So it's that balance. And so that even if I had a 10 in some ways, it's a balance of the whole process of producing. And when I worked that out, I thought it was a really good article, and he probably summed it up really well. I think that the message I like giving out is that planning, is that structure. If you're aiming to an end goal, that end goal being very clear. In sport, it's easy, especially Olympic sport, because the biggest event comes around once every 4 years. You know what day, you know what time you're going to be competing. Everything is being geared up to that. Business is very different from that. You'll have a lot more goals that you have to hit on more of a regular basis, and there's not one clear definitive. When you retire from business, your last day at the office is a celebration of what you've done. Even that for that selling the company, or of standing down and passing the reins on to somebody else, is that within sport, your last day at the office is normally your biggest day of your career. And you have to produce the goods on that day, because we tend to focus every 4 years, Olympics. You're not going to wind down and think, oh, I'll just play at it for a while. It's all or nothing. So we have these very clear goals, and something that Jürgen and myself worked on is that these goal times that I talked about, of how to achieve that. So you're working at low endurance, you're working at 75% of that, and to flat out pieces shorter than 2K that we race, you've got to be above the 100% to be able to make sure that in the right conditions at the right time, you can hit that of gold medal time. It's difficult to explain in some ways in rowing terms, because we're an outdoor sport. The temperature of water makes a difference to boat speed, depth of water, and wind plays a big part of boat speed. And there was a story that I came across a good few years ago, and I use it a lot. There's a guy called John Nabber, who was an American swimmer, and he went to the Munich Games, and his discipline was 100 meters backstroke, but he helped the relay team qualify for the final. You have 6 people in a swimming team, 4 that compete, and you can use the other 2 if you want to in the heat, if you feel you're strong enough country to get through to the final. So he helped the team get through. Then Mark Spitz came in and competed. So at the end of the games, he was proud of what he did, but he didn't win a gold medal, but been part of that. So as he came out, he think in 4 years' time in Montreal, I want to be winning that team gold. I want to be there swimming in it. And I want to be having the chance of doing the individual events of the men's 100 meters backstroke. So he looked, coming out of that games, of how he was going to do it and planning it. He looked at all the world's best times over a period of years, and saw there was almost a straight line of improvement going up, a little bit that we talked about before. So he felt he could predict a time that gold medal was going to be won in, and that was 55.5 seconds of 100 meters swimming on his back. So he set his goal. He knows where he wants to be. And then he thought, my personal best is 59.5 seconds. I'm 4 seconds off the pace of swimming on 100 meters in the pool. And by setting himself a goal, it was almost too difficult, and he almost gave up the sport because of it. And then he realized, I don't have to do that 4 seconds this year. I've got 4 years to do it. That's a second a year. That's still a big ask. He used to train for 10 months. That's 1/10 of a second improvement in a month's training. Roughly 30 days in a month. That's 1/300th of a second in a day's training. And he used to train 4 hours a day, every day. That's 1/1200th of a second improvement he's looking at in an hour. That's 1/5 of an eye blink that he's looking to improve in an hour. Now, that's got to be simple to find. The difficulty is you've got to do that every day, of every week, of every month, and so on. He got to the games. He was part of the relay team that won the gold medal, so very satisfied with that. He made the final of the backstroke, lined up with the two-time Olympic champion, a world record holder, beat him, took the gold medal in that in a time of 55.49 of a second. So almost identical to what seemed to be impossible 4 years, and working towards that. Now, that's what we do in our sport, of every training session working towards that goal time. When I retired, I set up my own charitable trust and said that I was going to raise £5 million for children's causes in 5 years. And when I announced it in my retirement announcement, it sort of rolled off the tongue really easily. And then I sort of thought, how the hell am I going to achieve that? And I thought, oh, the John Nabber story. Let's look at that. And so I started looking at it. If you look at 5 million, that's £20,000 to raise each week for 50 weeks a year. So having 2 weeks off for 5 years running. And I thought, every time I saw a clock, I was falling behind the target. So even the story that I used of John's, I've almost turned it on his head. And we picked 5 big events and then focused on that. And you mentioned in the build-up of the London Marathon, I did that 3 times. But 1 year I got into the Guinness Book of Records for running the London Marathon, not for the fastest time, but the most money raised by any individual at that time, which was 1.8 million for me completing the marathon. That's been smashed by now many times over. But by using John's story in a completely different way, it was able to achieve another goal that I set myself. A good question and difficult to answer in some ways is that I came down with colitis of diagnosed 10 weeks before the Barcelona games. My performance was tailing off really quickly at that point, and almost sort of proving on a day-to-day basis that you weren't quite the athlete. I was in a pair with Matt Pinson. We were world champions, world record holders, and going towards the Barcelona games. We got beaten at domestic trials, so that wasn't a good start. We turned that over in the first international regatta, so we raced them again. And then at the second international regatta, on the first day, we finished third. The second day, we didn't even make the final. And as we came off the stage, the chairman of selectors came up to us. So on our worst ever performance that we ever did together, the chairman of selectors saying, you're selected to go to the Barcelona games. You don't need to race again. Go and sort yourselves out and try to get back to the level that you were. So at least the federation had the foresight within that. Then I was diagnosed with colitis. Once I got on the treatment for that condition, I bounced back pretty quickly. But as you were saying, is that I wouldn't give into it, is that I still trained every day, even though that my rowing machine scores were going down, our performance on the water wasn't as good. I still had the physical strength within the gym, but the endurance levels were slipping away. And so that, because there was such a short gap from that process to the games, is that I bounced back relatively quickly. And because I'd done all the training, probably working even harder, and so training my body even at a higher level because of the struggles that I was going through at the time, I look at it now and I had a window of about 6 weeks, so I was quite healthy. And in the middle of that was the Barcelona Olympics. Soon after it, the colitis came back again, and I was struggling again. But we've got to grips with that. It's reasonably under control to this day. And then coming down with diabetes, that was 3 years before the Sydney Games. That was a different kettle of fish. 3 years before Sydney, And again, we went away on a training camp, and this is where the resilience comes into it, is that there were about 16 of us that went away on a land-based camp. We were cycling on the roads, we were doing rowing machine sessions, gym sessions, and sort of 3 sessions in a day, 2.5 hours on the bike, just over an hour on the rowing machine, and then some weights on the top of that. And every session I was doing was proving that I wasn't the same athlete as I was before. I had the diabetes and my colitis came back as well. So I was struggling with both of them. And I can remember one time of being out on the bike. I got left very early on that really struggled. And probably halfway up a very steep hill, we have a break and fill up our water bottles again and have a quick bite to eat. As I was just getting there, is that everyone saw me coming, knows that I'm a fast sprinter, so didn't want me to be in the group by the time we came, even though it wasn't a race. We're athletes, it's a race. And so they all jumped on their bikes. And then, so I had to make a choice. Do I carry on and try and get on the back of the group and try and get a little bit of slipstream and cruise it for a little while? Or do I stop and get some fuel? I decided I'd carry on. Jürgen was there. He changed my water bottle as I went past him. We had about another 5 minutes of the steep hill to get to, but then it was a very long downhill freewheel from there. And we got off. I got myself on the back of the group thinking, I've done it now. How can I save my energy? And halfway down the hill, I got a puncture. And Jürgen follows in the minibus behind, making sure that we're safe and any problems. And he says, Steve, get into the van. Session's finished for you today. And I said, no, Jürgen, I've got to complete this session. So he gave me the pump, he gave me a punch kit, repaired my puncher, got back on the bike. Obviously, by this time, they'd well gone. And coming round the coast road around the back of Cape Town, and I could see the hotel sort of miles away around the next bay, and thinking, this is it. This is my career over. I can't stay at the level that I'm at. I'm proving to myself that I'm not good enough. And I think, but I'm going to complete this session. I'm going to complete this session. I'm going to get back. I'm going to pack my bags. I'm going to the airport. My career's over. I was even thinking about one turn of the pedals. I can do one more turn of the pedals. So sort of did that. Okay, you've done that. Can you do another one? And mentally, you're looking at those small bits, not looking at the big picture, not looking at dreaming of the Olympics or gold medals, standing on that rostrum or whatever your motivation will be. I had to do one more turn of the pedals and then would stop. Oh, I did that one. Perhaps I could do another one. And that's how I got back to the hotel. By that time, they were all having their lunch. I threw my bike into the garage, went up to my room, and was too exhausted to even pack my bags. And I laid there for half an hour and then sort of think, okay, you completed that session. Why can't you complete the next one? The next one was on the rowing machine for 20 kilometers, which takes about an hour and 15 minutes. And again, I got left behind the group. It takes less than 2 seconds to do one rowing stroke cycle. Again, low rate, a lot of power. Again, I was just thinking about one stroke at a time. I'm going to do one stroke and then I'm going to stop. That's it, the end of my career. And I kept going. And so looking at those small elements and not the big picture, I was able to get through each training session. And then after a few months, the performance started coming back as they got the conditions under control of the colitis again and getting to terms with diabetes. And then performance starts coming back. And then you start looking at the bigger picture again. You start then dreaming of Sydney, where before it was just one stroke or one turn of the pedals. So the light at the end of the tunnel of the darkness that I was going through was a long, long way away. Just a pinprick of light and thinking I'm never going to get there. And the focus is that if you take it down to the smaller elements of here and now, not get bothered with the firefighting, with everything else that's going around, which I think sometimes business does. They lose direction of the long-term goal of where they're going to and get distracted of the short-term processes. Is that we've got to dream, we've got to move, and looking at those small elements get us to the bigger picture. You've got to do the basics to be able to get to the bigger picture. As I say, that the dream of standing on that podium wasn't there because I didn't think I was going to get there at that point. But it was the pride that I had to finish each session. That was going to be the last session in my career, and I was going to go off and do something else. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. But then sitting back and think, well, you did complete that. It wasn't a very high standard, but you got there. Perhaps you can do the next one. And so you're looking at those very small elements. I'm sure that Bradley, when he talks to you in a few weeks' time, is that we'll talk about Dave Brailsford and the marginal gains. You've got to do the small bits to make sure that the big picture comes back together. It is life-changing. That first coach that I talked about is that if I was being coached by him, he probably wouldn't have kept me on the team, where Jürgen did, because he felt that I had other qualities that brought to the team experience and age and process, and believed that I could still get back. So there's lots of things out there. Search the internet for athletes that have got diabetes, and there is a lot out there now. There wasn't 20 years ago. And finding that sort of pathway through of looking about of the energy that you need to do. There are several treatments for diabetes. Is that there's always a big question between type 1, type 2 when you're asked. I don't really know what type I am. I had a grandfather that had diabetes. He was classed as being type 2. I was 35 when I came down with diabetes. It's more likely to be type 2. But specialists from around the world say, no, your story, that's type 1. And there's sort of this stigma. If you're type 1, it seemed to be sort of genetic and not your fault. Where if you're type 2, then the obesity side, lifestyle seems to come in. And that's all nonsense in some ways, is that the two elements are very close to each other. There's slightly different ways of treating and dealing with it. But in simple terms, the energy you need comes from the food you eat, and the insulin that breaks down the food and gives you the energy that you need. So you've got to have the insulin to be able to choose. I choose to inject. I'm on an insulin pump now, so it's doing more automatically in my lifestyle. I still have to program it from that point of view, but I treated it like a Formula One car. They say the millions of bits that go into a Formula One car, if 2 of them fail, that car's not going to move. And so the human body is very complicated of its makeup, but we obviously need that energy. So if you put a lower grade of fuel into the Formula One car, you're not really going to perform at the level you should be. And so I had to come up with a process of getting back of the energy, not going onto the diabetic diet, and finding a regime. The consultant I was with was very forward thinking of doing that. And so there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of fantastic specialists. So search the internet. Ian Gallen was the guy that looked after me. When Theresa May came down with diabetes, is that she approached me and I put her in contact with Ian. He was working within her area as well, so it worked out quite well and helped. So if it's helped one of the top athletes and a former prime minister of carrying on their roles, that's got to be pretty good effort. So look at those sort of stories. Always very difficult. I'm a father of 3. It's like saying, which is your favourite child? Politically, we're supposed to be they're all the same. The fact is that they've got their own personality of the good and bad on different days. All mine are grown up now and starting to have families themselves. So it's a different process. But if you relate that to the 5 games that I went to, if I had my arm twisted, it would be the first one, because you had this dream to become an Olympic champion. And that was the first time it became reality. The others had its own personality. People look at it as that day of the final, standing on that podium, getting that medal round your neck. But for the athletes, it's the 4 years build up to get there. It has its own picture, its own personality. But it is, I suppose it's that first one of the dream becoming reality. As a rower, because you're sitting down, and the power elements of it, of getting the boat up and running, strength comes with weight. Obviously, when you're doing the amount of training of 2 to 4 training sessions a day, all endurance based, is that a lot of the athletes struggle to keep their weight up. So we had something like a 7,000 calorie diet per day. It's a huge amount of food. For an average man, you're supposed to have 2,500. So well over double of of that process. And if you weren't training, if you weren't sleeping, you were probably eating. We tended to graze quite a lot. I struggle to eat big meals and get that volume in, but you need that process. So you did that for 25 years. Stop. You've got those eating habits. So plate of food comes into it. The old standard joke within diets with rowers is that people ask you what your diet is, and you say a seafood diet. Oh, that's interesting. Is that fish, shellfish? And they, no, you see food and you eat it. It's just every opportunity you have. So your plate's always clean. Some of the rowers that on training camp we tend to eat quite a lot of pasta would have pile their plates up really high and have 2 or 3 of those plates. I couldn't eat that volume in one sitting, but that's the volume that you had to go through. And then you do that for a period of time. It's difficult to switch off. And so weight control is pretty difficult. Obviously, we're not exercising as much as we were. I tried to do a little bit. I tried to play golf twice a week very badly. So that's a very long walk because it's never in a straight line. And I do a bit of cycling in the winter. I've got a static bike in the back of the garage. I get online with another friend and we'll do an hour session. We'll chat for the first half as we're cycling away. As it gets a bit tougher, we'll go a bit quieter. But it's that fact of somebody else being there that helps me get there to do it. If I didn't arrange a time for golf or for getting on the bike, is that every day's life would take over from me. So where it was my focus to do, I know it's a good thing for mental health and physical health to keep the control of your weights and exercise, but linking them both together isn't quite as easy. Now I'm back in the real world and not an elite athlete where you're guided through quite a lot of the processes.
Right.
Good question. Very good question. And I'm not sure if I've got the answer for it. Is that when I was coming through as an athlete, you have your role models, and Mark Spitz was one of them within rowing. It was a guy called Pertti Karppinen who won 3 single titles at the Olympic level. Didn't win very much at the world level, but stepped up at the Olympics each time. So I've always looked at them. And then I would have loved to see Laura Chop carry on and compete at the Paris Games. I think that what she's done for female sports is incredible. Catherine Granger, who's not competing anymore in my sports, is difficult. With 5 Olympics she went to, 3 silvers and 1 gold. Very, very impressive indeed. The new crop come around. That's one of the things with the Olympics is that we don't know that much about it. It's 4 years since the last one. Bit different because of COVID. It's only 3 years. Is that there'll be names that we've never heard of before doing outstanding performance and will put themselves in their limelight. I think I'm very much of people that get the best of their ability. That's who I admire. Always difficult to do one sentence, but of dedication, passion, having a clear goal, you'll achieve your dreams. If you get all those elements together, you're going to go a long way in whatever your field is. So I wish everyone good luck in their own fields. I hope that some of the stuff that I've talked about today resonates and gives you sort of a few little triggers and thinking, oh, that's interesting. How can I adapt that to my process and work that I'm doing? Is that I use business a lot to get to where I did in achievement of my career. And I think sports people can spin back the other way and help business get to even higher goals.